A federal judge in Seattle is temporarily blocking the release of blueprints to make untraceable and undetectable 3D printed guns. A group of 8 attorneys general sued to stop a Texas company from making designs available online. The company, Defense Distributed, had reached a deal with the Trump administration in June that allowed them to make the blueprints public. The White House said Wednesday that the deal was made without the president's approval.
The Department of Justice made a deal without the president's approval on those regards. The president is glad this effort was delayed to give more time to review the issue, and this administration supports the decades-old legislation already on the books that prohibits the ownership of a wholly plastic gun.
Philip Bump is a national correspondent for The Washington Post who reported on 3D printed guns when he worked for The Atlantic, and he joins me now. Philip, good to see you. Hello. So in 2013, 5 years ago, you downloaded one of the blueprints from this company, Defense Distributed, and then tried to 3D print a gun. It was called the Liberator.
Right.
And tell me about that experience. How easy or how difficult was it?
I mean, that is the crux of the issue, at least over the short term, is that it was incredibly complicated, incredibly hard. I reached out to various friends who both could figure out how to make the files work correctly, a friend that actually had the 3D printer. Ultimately, I was only able to print a little washer about this big, and that was after spending hours and hours on it. It is absolutely the case that it is much easier to obtain a gun that is made by a gun manufacturer than it is at this point to do it this way.
So 2013, though, was 5 years ago, and as we know, technology really advances at a lightning pace. So have things caught up now? Is it easier now, or do you think it's still just as difficult?
I mean, there are difficulties which are not related to the technology. There are still, for example, in New York City, laws against having a handgun, right? It's already illegal to have that thing in the city, which is one of the things that I was trying to work through. But 3D printers are also not much more ubiquitous than they were then. They can certainly work better than they did at that point in time. But we're also talking about a piece of plastic which is meant to contain a small explosion, right? This is not something that you want to just have knock off quickly in a little cheap 3D printer. This is something you want to be pretty sure isn't going to blow up in your face, right? So there are standards to this which make it not something that can be printed by the standard sort of 3D printer that you might pick up at, you know, a local technology shop.
Well, I want to play a clip from CBS News' interview with the founder of the 3D printed gun company, Defense Distributed, talking about how he sees the fight over his blueprints.
I believe that I am championing the Second Amendment in the 21st century. I'm talking about files. I'm not talking about the guns. I'm not a licensed gun manufacturer. I don't make guns at this location. I have data. I can share the data.
So Wilson is making both a First and Second Amendment argument right there. What's your assessment of that argument?
Well, I mean, it's been established in various contexts that source code is a free speech issue, that you can share source code in the way that you can use speech. But it's also the case that speech is limited in certain contexts. There are certain things you can and can't say at certain points in time. I mean, according to legal standards, the go-to is, you know, yelling fire in a crowded theater, which isn't actually illegal, but I mean, it is an example of ways in which speech can be limited. This is clearly much more of a Second Amendment issue. Cody Wilson is specific in saying that he sees this as a way of stepping around the fight over gun control, simply because if people have the ability to mass produce weapons on their own, and in the future, as technology does continue to evolve, that may become more reasonable and more practical, that does change the nature of the debate over the Second Amendment.
Well, these blueprints were already posted online last week before a judge ruled to block them, and during that time, these plans were downloaded thousands of times. Is it basically now too late to scrub them from the internet? It seems like an incredibly difficult thing to try and do.
Yeah, I mean, once something's on the internet, I mean, these things were on the internet back in 2013 as well. I'm sure they've been floating around for years since. There's lots of things on the internet that aren't supposed to be on the internet that are on the internet illegally, which people can still access. I don't even, you know, movies. There are thousands of things that, exactly. So to some extent, the debate has already moved on, and I think the limitation is really that it is not particularly practical to actually print these things out. Otherwise, this would be a bigger, more immediate issue than it is.
So we heard the White House say that the president is happy to have the chance to review this, but is the reality here that he really can't do anything at this point, that it's now up to the courts?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We have a legal expert at the Post who I spoke with before coming on here, and that was her assessment. This is something that states attorneys general, as you mentioned, are already suing over this. In part, they are accusing the administration of having not gone through the proper procedure to try and determine whether or not this settlement should have been reached, which may reopen this can of worms. But yeah, to some extent, President Trump's hands are tied. And I'm not sure that there's a whole lot of political will to wade into this too deeply. The NRA is sort of taking a position that is slightly at odds with where Republicans are on this, and I'm not sure it's a fight he actually wants to have.
So on that point, we know Democrats have been outspoken against these 3D guns. Have we heard anything from Republican lawmakers?
I mean, generally speaking, this is a fairly easy way for people to take a stand. I mean, obviously people don't want folks to go into their garage, come out with a weapon that they can walk through airport security with. That's not really what we're talking about here for a variety of reasons, but it's an easy thing to oppose. But there are a lot of nuances that you can get into very quickly when you're considering this issue, and that's the sort of thing the NRA is absolutely going to weigh in on, and that can change the nature of the debate.
We only have about 30 seconds left, but on the NRA position, you mentioned these nuances. Can you just give us a thumbnail sketch here? Why is this a complicated issue?
Well, it's a complicated issue because it depends on how you actually construct the weapon. It depends on what sort of weapon you're trying to construct. You can construct parts of weapons, like the receiver for an AR-15. You can make yourself either out of metal or other materials, and that is a different sort of weapon than this Liberator, the all-plastic pistol, which is the sort of thing that we talk about generally when we're talking about these plans, because that is the thing that Wilson himself really put his emphasis on. This is the device to change the nature of the debate. It is a complicated subject, and there are lots of ways in which 3D printed parts can affect the politics of it.
All right, Philip Bump of the Washington Post. Philip, thanks so much.
Of course.